So Liz also had, in addition to consequences that she was fearing, she also had a not just right feeling.
Mhm.
Do you want to explain that, what we mean by not just right feeling?
Yeah. I think just sort of stepping back with OCD, I think in general, there's been a perception that if you have OCD, that you're afraid of a specific consequence. Something bad will happen if I don't do my compulsion. And, the way that I see that shown an example in the media or common ways we think might be I have to check my stove or the house is going to be burned down when I come back, that kind of a thing. So some people, actually, one of the people who I've learned from talked to me about core fears in OCD, right? One core fear being exactly what I was just saying, that if I don't do my compulsions, something bad specifically will happen at a measurable time. But there can be other fears too, such as I'm not going to get to know and I won't be able to handle not knowing. So just fear of uncertainty. And also a fear of I'm going to be really uncomfortable, not going to be able to handle that thing of being uncomfortable. And so when you talk about that not just right, that falls more in the realm of, hey, if I don't do things in this way that gives me this feeling, I'm going to have this awful uncomfortable feeling instead, and I'm not going to be able to handle it, and it might not ever go away. So therefore, I have to do these things in order to get this just right feeling instead of living with this uncomfortable, awful thing forever. So Liz is thinking about the stuff that she needs to get done, and she's trying to have exactly that kind of just right feeling, because the alternative is never ending discomfort.
Yeah, and I like to say that one of the most certain things in life is that your feelings will change. Or your thoughts will change, your feelings will change, your sensations will change. And so I do think it's common for people but with that in mind, people do get stuck on things for a long period of time. And I don't want to minimize the suffering that comes with that. But I'm also always looking for what's functionally maintaining the suffering they're experiencing. So if we start with the idea that it's avoidance, that creates, maintains, and intensifies anxiety, and once you stop avoiding, it will eventually pass. Then I think I'm kind of always looking for where someone might be resisting. And part of resistance can be a mental resistance where they're just preoccupied with the idea that a thought, a feeling, or a sensation isn't ever going to go away. And then they have anticipatory anxiety about how long it's going to be around. And then that paradoxically creates more anxiety. And then it seems like it's going to be around forever because of the anticipatory anxiety. So I think that cycle, that paradox, can really cause a lot of suffering also.
For sure. A lot of the people that I've had the opportunity to work with OCD, I was just thinking, I was just having this little conversation in my head for a second there about, do I see this more in kids or do I see it more in adults? So I'm going to say what it was I was going to say, which is that a lot of the folks that I work with have actually never tried to hang around with feeling uncomfortable at all. And they'll have this belief that it doesn't ever go away. And what flashed in my head was a child who I worked with recently who I said, how long do you think you're going to feel uncomfortable for if you don't do this thing that makes you feel just right? It'll never go away. It'll be there for the rest of my life, is what their belief was. But it's not true for just children. Adults feel that way too. And because they've never tried it out, that's what they believe. It's going to hang around.
Yeah. And I think it can be, besides the consequences of the fear. So something like this, leaving the stove on might mean that my house burns down. There's also I'm going to be uncomfortable for a prolonged period of time. And then that's going to get in the way of my life in some way. I'm not going to be able to function. I'm not going to be able to work or take care of my kids or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I find that that's often rooted in an experience where that actually occurred. So if somebody had a really intense sometimes people fear this without any past experience, but oftentimes people have actually had a depressive episode or an anxious episodes where they've actually lost functioning. And now as the feelings come back, they wonder like, how do I know that's not going to happen again? So I just like to remind people that oftentimes what happened in the past was a time that you didn't totally know what was happening. And you likely had different skills and different understanding of what your options were for more flexible behaviors and how to get out. And then I also think of beyond education and kind of having a different perspective, hopefully through treatment, there is an anticipatory anxiety about that. So I call it like sacrifice your present self for your future self. And so the reason your present self has anticipatory anxiety about whether or not you're going to get through this moment is because your past self didn't. So if your past self suffered, then your current self is going to be thinking, hey, let's give you some anticipatory anxiety. Let's give you some adrenaline in this situation because we really need to make sure that terrible thing doesn't happen again. But this is actually a time that if you stay with it, you get present and you cope effectively, your future self won't be so afraid of these sensations, thoughts, and feelings. And that's one way to gain experiential confidence. Do you have any thoughts about that pattern? Then I see that pattern pretty frequently. Do you have thoughts about that pattern?
Yeah, I do think for a number of people, there's this experience of, this feeling got in my way and I stopped being able to function. I also think that for some people, there's a belief, and I don't know that it's necessarily based on an experience that they've had where they couldn't function, but there's a belief that if I feel a certain way, it's going to taint any experience that I have. So, so if I feel really anxious while I'm at the restaurant with my boyfriend, it's going to totally mess up the experience that I have and I won't be able to enjoy it. So it's, better if I just leave the situation because it'll be tainted forever.
Yeah, Liz, actually, I don't think she commented on it in the podcast episodes, but she had experiences with clothing where if her clothing didn't feel just right, then it was hard to go to a social event for the very reason that you just described. So an exposure there or experiment there would be to wear something that didn't feel just right, go to the experience anyway, and see if you relax into wearing clothing that doesn't feel just right, if your mind is actually able to redirect your attention and kind of forget that you don't feel just right, or even let yourself feel not just right the whole time and live with the possibility that it wasn't, that you have the memory of that event and that uncomfortable experience coexisting, which can also be as you learn that you can tolerate that can be really empowering.
Yeah. I think about some people who are really creative too. And, people who are artists or songwriters. And I've experienced some with OCD who, won't write their songs or draw while they're in the middle of one of these feelings because they're concerned that forever their piece of art will feel wrong. And so I've had them experiment with, well, let's see, let's try if you're willing to, something that, it doesn't have to be your masterpiece, but let's try something and see, can you create and does it feel horrible forever?
And that can be such a source of confidence that if you know that you can do the thing you love while you feel uncomfortable, that's really a way to overcome procrastination. Because I think circling all the way back, another source of procrastination is waiting to feel just right before you get started on something.
Exactly.